Hello guys, so this is the second video I promised I would upload, and in this video we will be talking about consequences of economic growth, what are the policies that governments use in order to promote economic growth. We will be discussing business cycles and its effect on our production possibility curve. So please, if you have any question, don't forget to type it down on the comment box. And I need you to know that we are using the book that we are using in class, which is the Britain Titley book. Okay, and remember, it's the same topic, whatever book we will be using. Now, please, I need you to open your books to page 323, and I want you to have a look at this graph here. Remember, this you already took it in grade 9, and it is about the PPC or the PPF. So it means I'm talking about the different production possibility curve or frontier. So economic growth and the productive potential of an economy, remember, I can put two different goods. It doesn't matter whether the capital goods is on the y-axis or the x-axis, as long as we have two different goods that we are talking about. Okay, so it's telling us with the amount of resources that we have, this is the maximum capability of production. And this is the different production that I can do. So I could either produce, let's say, 10 consumer goods and 5 capital goods. Or if I want to produce more of capital goods, it means I would have to give up consumer goods. And this is when we have opportunity cost. Now, anyway, this we already took it from a long time ago. I just gave you a quick reminder. I would like to tell you what would happen when we have a shift of the curve to the right. So remember, any shifting to the right, it means we say this is an increase. And any shifting to your left-hand side, it means we are saying there is a decrease. Now, please, I want you to think, before you read what's on the slide, I would like you to think what would cause the production possibility curve to shift to the right. So what would make us produce of both more consumer goods and capital goods? So please take a few minutes, think, and then so pause the video, try to think what might be the reason, and then put play. So what we will be doing, so how economies grow, it is first by the discovery of more natural resources. So guys, the more resources that we have, it means the more we can produce. So if they discover more natural resources in the country or man-made resources or whatever type of resources, it means they will be capable of producing more. The second one is investment in new capital goods and infrastructure. So this would also lead to economic growth. This means it will shift our PPC or the PPF to the right. So, for example, when private firms or private sector firms, they spend on capital goods. For example, I'm talking about machines, buildings, technology. Why? Because they will be expanding their scale of production. Yani, this is when we will be having economies of scale, which means it's massive production, economies of scale. We're talking about massive production, and when companies produce a lot of quantities, it means automatically their average cost will decrease. Okay? The third reason would be technical progress. I'm sorry. So technical, I'm talking about technology. I'm talking about new inventions and production processes. That when we have new technology, wouldn't that help us produce more? Okay, So we are being capable of producing more. And this is done by, for example, if one industry was facing technological advances, that might be contagious to other industries. So automatically we would be having more production. The fourth one is increasing the quantity and quality of human resources. So we are getting more laborers, and the laborers are becoming better. How can they become better? It is by becoming more productive. And when workers are more productive, remember, it means they can produce more. How can I become a more productive worker? It is by receiving the proper education or more education, and it is by receiving training courses. This would allow me to become more of a skilled labor. Okay? And also, finally, the last one is having more efficient resources, or reallocating our resources in a more efficient way. So an inefficient allocation of resources will constrain economic growth. So moving resources from less productive uses to more productive uses, it will boost output and growth. So don't waste your resources on something that is not productive. Okay? All right, guys, this is a new section, but before I start explaining it, I would like to ask you to try and write your own definition of what is a recession. It should only take you 1 minute. So, in your own words, what do you think a recession means? So, what I am going to explain today is evaluate the causes and consequences of a recession. So I would be talking about first, what is economic growth? It is increase in the real GDP of an economy. Please remember that. Uh, so here, if we take a look, before I start the explanation of a recession, I would like you to think of something called a rapid economic growth, a slow economic growth, and a negative economic growth. If you take a look at that slide, at the first image, I mean, look at year one and then year two. I can say that this is considered to have a rapid economic growth, since look at how much their production increased, their level of output. It increased a lot. Whereas here, I cannot deny the fact that the output is not increasing, but it did not increase as rapidly as the first image. This is why I will say this is a slow economic growth. Whereas here in the third image, if you can see in year two, they were not better off. On the contrary, they were worse. Their output decreased. So because of that, I would say this is a negative economic growth, and this is what is meant by a recession. Or I can say, instead of experiencing economic growth, I would say that the real GDP, since am concerned about real GDP, I say that real GDP here, it means it is decreasing. So let's talk about the definition of what is an economic recession and what is an economic depression. So an economic recession, guys, it means that we're talking about a short period of time, and definitely we are experiencing negative economic growth, which means decrease in a real GDP, and usually it will only last for half a year, or maximum a year or more, after which the economy recovers and will continue to grow again. Whereas a depression, it is a severe recession. It is a severe recession, and I can call it a slump. It is also known as a slump. Now, when I'm talking about an economic depression, it means it will take the economy a much longer period of time to start experiencing growth again. So this is why I would say it lasts for several years in which there is a continuous fall in the real GDP. So the economy is not experiencing any growth. So here, since we are talking about the recession, we will be discussing what economic policy should the economy be using to fight off a recession or to start experiencing economic growth again. So here, this is an example of what is meant by a growth cycle. And growth cycle, or I can relate this to the business cycle, where every country in the world would be experiencing an expansion, a recession, a depression, but we consider it a cycle because we are supposed to grow out of it again. So the rate of economic growth is every 5 to 10 years. Some are more severe than others, and if the rate of economic growth is decreasing, we said it would be considered to be a recession, but if it lasts for so many years, then it will become a depression or a slump. So here we're measuring the annual growth in real GDP. So if it is increasing, it means they are facing economic growth. When it is going down, it means they are experiencing a decrease in economic growth. Okay, so as you know, why do we call it a cycle? Because it is considered to be a fluctuation, cyclical fluctuations. Every country will face that. Every economy will face that. Remember, we always said we are using policies to try to achieve macroeconomic objectives. We explained that in the previous chapter. Sometimes we said some economists, they decide they don't want to use any policy because they believe every economy or country will be facing cyclical fluctuations and the economy will grow out of the problem by itself. That is why they do not need to use any fiscal or monetary policies. They let the economy fix itself. This, you can find it on your books on page 328 and 329. This graph, I would like to explain what is meant. So what are we doing here? We are looking at something called an economic cycle. And in an economic cycle, it means the economy is facing fluctuations where it will be experiencing growth, it will be experiencing a recession, or it might be experiencing a depression. So at first, the economy would be growing. So when we are growing, we can call it an expansion, which is the economy is experiencing rapid economic growth until it reaches a boom or the peak of the growth. What is the peak of the growth? It is considered that the demand for goods and services rises faster than output. People are demanding more than the available output. So profits will peak and prices rise as an economy overheats. Now, when prices rise, here we thought we were happy. Prices became very high. This would lead to an inflation. So the demand of goods and services will not be as high as it used to be before. And that is why we will start noticing a decrease of the growth rate. Okay? So when it is decreasing, it means the economy is facing a recession. So this green line here that I am drawing, this would be my recession. What is a recession? We already explained it before. And after the recession, when it reaches the slump, we call it, which is the minimum point of the curve, it means this is a depression. I can call it a depression, which is the lowest point of a recession. Here what happens? Aggregate demand and output and incomes and prices are at the lowest. Now, since prices are very, very, very low, remember, if we have a depression, we can overcome it. And what happens is the economy will start to recover again. Since prices are very low, some people will increase their demand on goods and services. So what will happen? if you look at the blue curve, since there will be an increase in demand of goods and services, I will be experiencing growth again. But this growth, it came after a depression. This is why I would be calling that blue curve a recovery. Okay, so guys, please, you can find these definitions on your book on page 328 and 329. So what is a recession? Remember, I asked you before to write the definition. Please pause the video and have a look at it. We already explained it. Now, I want to ask you whether I'm talking about annual growth again. So I'm talking about economic growth in terms of a real GDP. I want to see if it is short-lived, long-lived, or it's a double-dip recession. So as we said before, every economy faces a business cycle. Now, when it is a U-shape, it means it is a prolonged slump. It will take more time. Look at the years. It will take more time to overcome, to start facing a recovery. Okay, this is why we call it a prolonged, a U-shaped economic recession. Now, if you take a look at the second graph, it is a V-shaped. V-shaped, it means this is a short-lived. It directly happened. It directly happened, this recession. It reached a slump, and they will quickly overcome it in a shorter period of time than the U-shape. When you have two you reach two slumps, it means you are facing something called a double dip recession. So a U-shaped, as a summary, a U-shaped recession is considered to be a prolonged slump. In contrast, a V-shaped recession refers to a short-lived contraction in the economy, and it is followed by a rapid and sustained economic recovery. Look, it's recovering quickly from it. Okay? Here we will be discussing the consequences of economic growth. Guys, remember, this is a perfect discuss questions on your externals. Why? Because we will be talking about how economic growth will benefit us and what are the problems that result out of it. So let's start off with the benefits. You can find this in your books on page 331. Economic growth, remember, it means there is increase in real GDP. So it means they are producing more. So we are having more goods and services, which means it makes people happier because more wants could be satisfied. Now, when we are willing to produce more goods and services, it means we will need more people to in order to produce these goods and services. So this will increase employment opportunities. And when we get increase in employment, it means we will be having more incomes. And when we have more incomes, what will happen? The government could increase its tax revenues. So when the government has more money, it is capable of improving the public services. And it is capable of providing us also with public and merit goods. Also, when we have increased sales because there is more production, it means businesses will be capable of making more profits. And more profits, also this would lead to increase in tax revenue. Now we are also capable of having a low price inflation if the output growth keeps pace with the demand. And finally, when people have more income, their wants are satisfied, this means we have improved living standards. Now, what are the problems? So why is it bad? Technical progress may replace labor with machines. So because of technological advancement, People might become unemployed since the companies will replace them with machines, since machines sometimes could be more effective than people. Also, scarce resources are used up at a faster rate, so we are not conserving the resources, and that would be disadvantage. We are using up our resources in order to keep up with the increased production, and because we are producing a lot, this would lead to pollution, and the pollution would damage our environment. Finally, people are not necessarily better off if growth is achieved. For example, by producing more weapons, more cigarettes, coal-fired power stations, or even more cars, televisions, and computer games, that would lead to problems. Now, the cigarettes, for example, is an example of a demerit good. It means it is something harmful. And also the televisions and computer games, this is a problem because for the people, they would become less social. It might lead to more problems later on in the future, such as autism and so on. Governments are concerned with achieving sustainable growth. Now, what is sustainable growth? Sustainable growth involves reducing the rate at which we use up the natural resources. Okay, so it is economic growth without the depletion of the natural resources or without harming the environment. How can that happen? By reducing the rate at which we use up our natural resources. So try to use less resources, try to conserve them a bit more, reducing waste in production and consumption. So let us become more effective and efficient while we are producing. So don't use too many resources and they go on waste. This wasted material, try to produce something else. Try to minimize this waste. And finally, it would be to reduce pollution. Okay? Now, this is analyze the range of policies available to promote economic growth. So since economic growth is one of the macroeconomic aims of government, how can the government achieve it? So what is it supposed to use? Remember the policies that we studied previously at the beginning of Unit 4? So we were talking about demand side policies or supply side policies. Okay, so what are the policies that promote growth? First, let's say that the government will use fiscal policies, but what the fiscal policy should be an expansionary fiscal policy. So it means they would want people to demand more. So they would want to increase aggregate demand. How will the government increase aggregate demand? It is by cutting tax rates. So when people pay less taxes, they will be left with more money. They are left with more money, more disposable income. It means they can demand more. And when they are demanding more, companies need to produce more, so output is increasing, and this is economic growth. So if you were asked, for example, what should the government do in order to promote growth, you would say the government could be using an expansionary fiscal policy, or also it could be using an expansionary monetary policy, which is they need to decrease the interest rates. Why? If they decrease interest rates, what would people do with their money? Would they be saving more or less, borrowing more or less? Remember, lower interest rate, it will discourage people to save their money, so they will spend it. So we are increasing aggregate demand. Also, when we have low interest rates on borrowing, people would be more encouraged to take a loan from the bank. And when you take a loan, you are left off with more money. So more money, automatically it means it will increase aggregate demand. Also, finally, what the government can be doing is using the supply side policies. And the supply side policies, it is affecting aggregate supply. So what will the government do here? Guys, these were already explained before. Okay? please write them down. Remember, you have to be specific. So when you're talking about demand side policies, you cannot tell me a contractionary monetary policy. It is wrong. Why? Because it was supposed to be an expansionary one, where they want to increase the aggregate demand. And this is the summary of the chapter. Okay, so it's not enough to say, oh, okay, I studied the summary. No, please, because remember, we need to elaborate all of our answers. Make sure you write down the notes on your copybooks. That's it for today. Have a lovely day. And don't forget, if you have any question, please type it in and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Take care and stay safe.